All right, everybody, welcome to Tuesday. It is my favorite day of the week. Hackster Café. We talked to someone who's a badass in the hardware community, and this week we're talking to Nick Pinkston, who is someone that I've known for over 10 years now, which is established. Nick, you're now the founder and CEO of Volition, so let's hear a little bit about that. What is Volition?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, essentially, in one case, it's basically like we're building a marketplace to organize all the world's hardware components. So, like everything from bolts, motors, gears, everything from hardware stuff, all the way to like, I mean, you can get like lubricant and cleaning supplies, and really, we're just taking all these vendors and bringing all their data in, and then harmonizing it into one kind of like one catalog to rule them all. And then, the idea is that when you do that and you get all this like CAD files and data sheets and stuff like this, it kind of acts like GitHub in many ways, because there isn't really like a GitHub for the mechanical type of world. And so we're kind of a hybrid of those things.
It's always interesting. There's a lot of different things that claim to be the GitHub of hardware, and I feel like every time someone says that, they mean something different. Because
Yeah.
last week we had like an online PCB design tool, Flux.ai, who do a collaborative online design environment.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Yeah.
is there an element of collaboration, or can you build like parts lists together, like have a shared organization or something in Volition?
So right now, like we focus on like the repository aspect of GitHub, and
Ah,
so like essentially it's like, what if you just had everything? Because it's funny on GitHub, it's like, okay, you can do the team stuff, or you can do the like deploy and have Git kind of stuff. And
yeah.
so in effect, our Git is into tools like Flux. So actually, like we haven't released this, but like we are going to have an API for this. And we have a bunch of interest for
Ooh.
other tools. So in a sense, I would say that like Flux is probably like an IDE, and then it's a collaborative IDE in a sense,
Uh-huh.
or I'm not sure when this analogy runs out, but something like
Oh
this.
yeah, I can see that.
But everyone who has one of those is like, oh man, that data shit sucks. And so they're like, hey Nick, can you guys at Volition actually do that? And so we are doing that. It's just a huge, Octopart did a great job in the electronics world, and they, I mean, it took them a long time to kind of like get the hardware guys to be comfortable listing all of their stuff, right? And
Uh-huh.
so, my friend Sam Rosell started this. I talked to him before I ever started Volition, actually. And, when I talked to him, like, hey, why isn't there a lot of mechanical stuff in there? He was like, yeah, because
Right.
it's really hard to do mechanical. And so that was actually one of the hardest things. The hardest thing that we had to do at Volition was actually like, one, electronics vendors are a little more sophisticated. They make computer chips. You got to be pretty sophisticated for that. People who make bolts, less data literate, and also like Sam and Octopart in the industry had already developed all these data feeds and APIs with that information already, at least decently structured, where, a lot of people we interact with, we're the first time they're putting their parts on the internet, or at least the first time they're doing real data work to it. And so a lot of times we just get raw information. And so the big
Ooh.
deal is like, how do we help people who are really good at making bolts, or, whatever the part is, but not great at like data or internet marketing or this kind of thing? That's really our raison d'etre for the suppliers of this world.
That's so cool. You're taking all this stuff and making it really visible. Um, it also blows my mind that you also have stuff like office chairs on here. I keep scrolling down expecting to get there, but you have so much stuff on the site, which is obviously a pro. But like the you've got like straps and like
Yeah, yeah.
all this interesting
I
stuff.
know
But
it's really wild,
maybe.
right? I mean, what we do is like we do get catalogs and remove components from them. Like we've had these like
Oh.
really general purpose hardware distributors, and there's like prison equipment and like batons and shields, and I'm like, yeah, that's not our vibe. Like no batons and shields. But if the desks in the prison are useful, then fine.
Ah!
you know. But
I mean,
yeah,
if you're building like AI robots, maybe.
yeah. Have your personal shield just in case. Yeah. We do
Uh,
we do sell machine guards, so that could be
oh,
more
there we
more
go.
appropriate.
You get your scissors.
But what's funny is like, so I was the one who took the first crack at the homepage taxonomy, right? And so we
Uh-huh.
had to blend all these different sites together to do
Yeah.
that. And so it's really interesting. Like I just have read so many different taxonomies from people who've done different pieces of it that are closer to our kind of core market. So there's no one right now that like has a similar taxonomy.
I love that it's called a taxonomy, like with with organisms and stuff. Is that an official term?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, in sort of catalog, people talk about
ah,
taxonomies, and especially for the homepage, which literally is like there's only one thing in each spot, just like the Linnaeus, animal
yes, yes,
taxonomy,
yes.
Whereas an ontology, well, ontologies can be a lot of things, but in this case, they're a little bit more general purpose, like they could be all sorts of self-referential things, which actually is what the catalog is more like in some ways. But yeah, we do have this hierarchy because one of the things customers told us a lot is like they really love to have like the pictures, because a lot of people are like, oh man, I know it's this thing, it's like roughly in motion control, it's a screw type, and it's like ball screw, and it's like, yeah, and they just need to see it and see a name. And so how do you like click around and do it if you don't know what to search? And that's actually where a
Yeah.
lot of those general purpose marketplaces like an Amazon or something that does it, their interface is really built for like kind of semantic search, and there's a little bit of filtering, but if you look in their hardware categories, you're not going to be able to say, oh, give me a stepper motor and tell me the degrees per step, and it just doesn't do that stuff. So that's actually the hardest thing we do, is we made our own software to do all that wrangling to power. Like on the
Yeah.
left, there's all these filters. When you go a little deeper, that you can say like, what screw material do you want, and all this other stuff, right?
You can choose manufacturers, pack size, pack
Yeah.
price, unit price.
Yeah.
Very
And
much.
depending on what it is, there's all these different specs.
You gotta find something else more like specific.
Yeah,
Oh,
probably
there's
like
so much stuff.
screws or
Here we
something
go.
is probably like,
Yeah. Let's go in here. Also, you've got some really nice wireframes of these things, CAD models of these things.
so what's interesting is those are generated from CAD using this kind of pipeline we have. So you can just upload images and auto get those things, because, we work with like, literally we have to work with
Nice.
tens of millions of products.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to generate stuff for that many things in like a manual way. So we had to do a lot of stuff.
This is amazing. I love sets of filters. You can just
No,
dive in
I
here
know.
forever.
It's very satisfying. And like, I think that a lot of the stuff is like, we wanted to use this ourselves, like, we used to run the factory at Plethora. I built stuff, like since I was kind of conscious and knew how to, and kind of everyone on the team, our founders, Natalie and Duffy as well, grew up making stuff and still make stuff, so this was kind of a tool that was, kind of scratching our own itch, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. So if I may return for a moment to the ontology taxonomy conversation,
Yeah.
we're a project site. So on sort of the grand scale, we're really a documentation site, and
Yeah.
I've been making some documentation for example, people trying to build electronics more sustainably, and
Cool.
this is absolutely a challenge that I'm facing, is like, how do you organize everything? And with a wiki structure, which is what I'm using, it sounds like that's more like an ontology where there's no strict hierarchy and things can kind of link to each other from any point.
I
Do
think
you have
that's great. I am definitely not an expert, like library science person or whatever. Those people like really know all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, also there's the philosophical concept of ontology, right? Which is like,
yeah.
what are things that exist? There's like the whole thing.
And how are they like each other?
And it's funny because you get into these weird questions and you organize this data, right? Like equivalent problems of like, is a taco a sandwich? And you get
Oh,
weird convoluted things being like, well, if a screw without threads, is it still a screw? Like, just weird stuff like that. It's kind of funny.
this happened to me last week. I was like assembling something, I think it was an Arduino thing. And they kept saying screws in the tutorial, and I was like, aren't these bolts? Don't they have like a flat end?
Oh,
And
I
I'm
know that one's
pretty sure
hard.
those
Yeah.
but yeah, do you have any tips for someone who's trying to organize their stuff in a way like this, whether that's like documentation or objects in a bins and things?
It's interesting because it's one of these things, like how there always comes up one of these productivity tools that claims to be able to do everything, and it's like, you should use, Basecamp was one of the first ones I remember using. Then there's like Asana, or now this Monday has ads everywhere, and I think that like the reason none of them get dominant, like like GitHub got dominant because of the network effects, but like as far as these work stream tools and organization tools, it feels like everyone has like different needs. And so like we looked at like people doing like bomb software, and it's not like there's any one rule them all bomb software. Like in many ways I think it really depends what you're doing. I mean, we try not to change how people work too much. Like if you like working in spreadsheets, cool, like we want to support that. And there's been too many startups that try to do bomb management and died. because I think behavior change is hard. So I think it is challenging. I mean, I always start with, at least on our catalog, I think about like, okay, I call it like reverberatory like organization. So you're reverberating between the very high level customer centric stuff, which is like, okay, you go on a homepage and you're our customer thing. Let me get into their brain and be like, what am I looking for and what would I organize, right? So customer centric of the user. But then when you start merging in these other taxonomies, right? So every catalog we have is a taxonomy, or we have to kind of create one or categorize it in our taxonomy. And when you do that, you get like these, oh, well, if you got some custom or really specialty gear vendor, maybe your gear taxonomy needs to be built out further and rearranged. And when you do that, it changes the top level taxonomy. And
Ooh, yeah.
you go from the top level, like user view from the very top level all the way to the bottom and be like, oh yeah, we do need a, helicoil inserted gear, like all these different stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think that it's hard to just automate this stuff. Like we found that you still have to have humans in the loop for a lot of it if you want it to be good.
Yeah, I'm noticing I was just wandering around in here.
Yeah.
Verbs are hard. Last week when I was checking it out, and I noticed that servos, for example, you've got two different links to servo motors, but one of them is inside the other, and I'm certain that makes sense in some way, and it's just indicating that this stuff is so difficult to do in a way that's like absolute.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, like, we're still very much organizing this. So you will explore around and you may find inconsistencies, and they're just inconsistencies. they're not any special thing.
It does still say beta on it, so
it does say beta. But you know what? Like even the most like cream of the crop best ones, like your McMaster cars of the world, we still find weird stuff in there. And it's like, yeah, it's just hard to do, But yeah, and those kind of things are like manual. Yeah, so like the stuff that's interesting about this, like, there's a taco as a sandwich, but there's also like, well, this thing is like a party pack of tacos that comes with all these like, sauces or whatever. And you're like, wait, that's a taco system, right? And so it's like, we have to figure out where that is. And, different companies, right? It's like, oh, well, our servo system has its own controllers that only work with those servos. So you can't just say, pick any servo, pick any control. It's got to work together, right? So you really should have them as a system. And that's where this like merchandising, you can't just be like, yo, computer, figure it out, like match semantically or whatever. It doesn't work that way. Like you have to really think like humans do. And maybe AI gets there. We actually have tried AI stuff, and it still definitely is not close to doing this stuff yet. But yeah, that's what we found.
Yeah, and for example, having a human in there, humans do unpredictable things. So I'm often enraged and confused by the decisions that my autocorrect makes. It's like, surely you meant to do this. And I'm like, no, I'm a human. I do things that you don't expect sometimes. So for example, maybe you do want to order two different parts that don't work together, and you want the system to get out of the way with that, instead of being like, no, you did it wrong. It's like, I'm not wrong.
We ran into that exact thing. Like, yeah, like basically, like we, when we were trying to do this taco as a sandwich thing, you can define these things really rigorously, but then you end up getting into all these knots handling the exceptions. So we found that like, don't be that rigorous. Have like sloppy rigor as far as like, you need to like. It's funny. There's actually like theories of ontology, right? Like Plato's instances, like the Platonic forms. Like what is chairness? And is a couch a chair? And then there's like maybe like Wittgenstein's ontology of language, which basically says like, yeah, it's kind of all statistical, just figure it out, And I think he was more correct than Plato, who like was trying to be a little too clever, and like we also tried to be a little bit too clever, and then we ended up where Wittgenstein was anyway, with like, you just got to kind of have human stuff, and it kind of just, the semantics evolved from human thought and like, perceptions of the world. So you kind of have to maintain that. And yeah, like humans do weird things, like you're saying, like, yeah, order two incompatible things for a good reason. And you just can't make those things that rigid, or else you make the interface annoying, So it's like, suggest, don't enforce,
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's exactly what I wish my computers would do more of, especially with the AI stuff. I feel like there's a certain point at which it sort of forces a homogenization and I wanted to just show really quickly. We keep mentioning the what is a taco, what is a sandwich, etc. The cuberule.com is the current central point of info
Oh my
for
God,
if
that's
people
awesome.
haven't encountered this before.
No, what
Like
is
what
this?
is and there's also, this other actually this might be a different one where, it's about does it have bread on starch on top and bottom? Like what is a ravioli? What is a Pop Tart? What is a
But like,
anyway.
do they have open face sandwiches on here?
Yeah, I don't know. They don't actually. Although,
Oh
is it
man.
hot dog open face depending on which way you
I
hold it?
I know, I know. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, I know that's the fun thing
Here we
of
go.
so it's calling it toast, but what if it doesn't toast it? Isn't it just like bread, like buttered bread or something?
Yeah.
This is so funny. Yeah, I love this stuff. But this gets into the thing of like, it's funny. So we encountered something that like to me inspired me of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? So Heisenberg, right? There's two things that trade off, which is I think it's position and momentum, maybe velocity, something like this. And the idea is if it's a property of the universe, at least according to this thing, that says that like the closer you try to get to its position, the less you know about its velocity or its
Right.
momentum, something like this, right? And vice versa. So like we created this thing that, or I'll say I'll created it just so I don't make anyone else have to own this joke, which is the Merchenberg uncertainty principle, which basically like is I think maybe a property of like the human universe, or at least maybe a tension, which is we tried to make metrics to understand how good we were doing for certain stuff. And you can do productivity things like how many items can you categorize, this kind of stuff. But you get in this weird thing where like you can do a lot of recategorization and add a lot to the human stuff, but the same number of things are categorized on both sides. So like if categories move around and the number doesn't change, is merchandise better, And we tried all these convoluted things trying to measure it, and we're like, you know what? Humans have to just look at it like editors, and like there's a kind of like engineering taste that you have to do it, is what we found.
Yeah, you can't fully automate it. You've always gotta, like, have some sense of, like, discrimination of being able to say, "This is proper, this is not." Or at
But
least, "This is what I'm trying
yeah.
to do, this is not."
Yeah, and I think that the more we made it just easy for human people to look at it instead of the data to try to tell us some complex metric. I mean, the only real metric you can get like this is like maybe revealed customer preferences by buying. But if you have 10 million things, you're not going to get data across that unless you're like the size of Amazon or something. So we had to have other ways of thinking about it.
Yeah, and, related to the Amazon thing, we have a little bit of a slightly trolly comment here, which just goes straight to
Oh,
AliExpress, but we kind of talked about this a little bit in the beginning of, like, what
oh
it
yeah.
is that you bring to,
Yep.
searching for electronics parts online.
Yeah, and I would say we're more focused on the mechanical than the electronics. And one of the reasons for that is that like a lot of people on electronics, one, Octoparter did that. So like, we don't need to, and there's a bunch of other, fine chips and stuff like this as well. So so we don't want to reinvent that. I think I found like 10 or 15 of them actually that do something like this. But I would say the main thing that differentiates us from like Alibaba and these kind of things is if you go on there, Amazon, Alibaba, these are general purpose marketplaces. And if you go in, you kind of have like, they have like a million sellers and you're getting a million different sort of sub taxonomies and ways of representing specs, which makes it so you can only really semantically search. So for instance, like if you're looking for motor power and you're talking about output in kilowatts, or are you talking about input in kilowatts, this kind of thing, you can't say like 10 kilowatt motor and know what you're getting, right? Because it doesn't know. And the semantic searches have really never done a good job. So you kind of have to do the spec stuff and have real spec taxonomies and in some sense, so you can actually say, no, I meant the input current, or whatever for amperage or something like this, And so I think if you have a part number, that's easy. Just, go on Octopart, Google it. But a lot of our stuff is like, you don't even know what it is, So like you get to the part number at the end of it, but you might be saying, oh, I need to control motion. Do I want to use like a linear actuator, a servo, a stepper, hydraulics, pneumatics? There's all these different things. And you might not know like, oh, there are pancake style stepper motors with encoders that is way cheaper than a, like a servo with similar properties. Okay, like let's use that. And then you can use like, the price thing. You can use various other filters to get there. You can't do that on Alibaba or Amazon and get anything like. And I would say also like Amazon and Alibaba also suffer from this problem of like kind of like search engine hacking. And so like everyone just throws a bunch of shit into the name that's like trying to get them to do that. And then you can pay Amazon to like put put yours first as like an ad. And that
Uh-huh.
is not consumer friendly. Like that works if you're like, I need a red sweater, and maybe every red sweater is kind of equivalent or at least more so than a specific motor. But if you're searching for something like this, it's not customer friendly to let people just put their stuff on the top of a search. And so
Yeah.
to be customer friendly, we wanted to be able to do that.
And for this, you'd absolutely have the thing be titled like "Sure Steps to Promote an EMS17 frame." All this stuff would have to be in the name of the device of the product in order for you to find it on there. And even then, there's going to be, like you mentioned, all this spam stuff in the way.
Well, and a lot of this stuff is not lined up in any way. So like if it says 61 ounce inches or whatever, what if someone else is using like Newton meters or something, it's like, it doesn't do any of those conversions. And a lot of times they're not, they're not SI units, it might be like something like pulse width modulation versus, like all these different things, right? As a spec. So that's why you need engineers on the back end organizing it, which is what we do. Is we have a bunch of like, we have different people who actually know different fields doing it,
So we've mentioned that this is, obviously with there being so many engineers involved, it's very much a work in progress. It's under active development. It's currently in beta stage. What do you see as being the markers for you getting to a final stage with this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe never final,
Or
but I would say
a
that,
release stage,
like
maybe.
right now, the website, we consider it like definitely pre-product market fit. There's a lot of stuff that's not organized well or presented well. And even on our cart, we have a warning that's like, if you need this tomorrow, don't rely on us, basically. So it's a pretty strong, like, we don't want to mess up your schedule right now. And the reason the site is actually public is because of the supply side. So our suppliers that we get, which is a lot of what we do, is doing deals with all these guys, is we go out to them, sign deals, get their data. That itself is this huge pain in the ass. But to do the deal when no one's heard of you, because we used to be in stealth, it's really hard for them to be like, yeah. But now when they see the website, these guys are like, oh, wow. Like a lot of them are like, can we buy this website? Like, can you send us the white label version? Can you do this data for our website? So
you got Festo on there. I was like, wow, yeah.
I know it's really interesting. And like sometimes those come through distributors, and sometimes they're direct deals with the OEMs. Like we tend to focus on distributors just to get catalog breadth, more. But yeah, so to answer your question, it's like, so we want to get like the merchandise kind of in a better place, just like in having something for every category. So there's some categories that are weaker, and then getting it organized to where we feel good about it. But we're just scaling it up. It actually took a long time for us to get the data stuff working, because it really is like, when I interviewed like Amazon's industrial team, like some people who used to work there, they were like, yeah, we tried to do this and we failed to do this, and I talked to Octopart, same thing. Like they thought mechanical was like the hardest category, and it almost killed us, frankly. But we actually got on the other side, and so now we have a system that can do it. And so now it's like kind of full throttle pushing that engine.
You mentioned that getting the mechanical part together almost killed you. I'm really curious about two things. Is that the biggest challenge that you've faced, and how did you work through that? And also, like, maybe I'll ask this again after, but what's your favorite part about what you do at Volition?
Yeah, ask me the second part after, because I'll forget it. The first one was, what's the hardest part? And it's definitely this data organization thing. Like, it's funny. Like, I think that I knew I'd be able to get the people and the money and the customers and even the suppliers I was like pretty like true with. But like after some time, we realized like, okay, we built the marketplace software, the front end, and all the back end stuff to do it in, I don't know, 6 months or, something like that. And we're like, great. And then the data stuff has been like the pain in the ass the entire time. And we basically, the thing that almost killed us was we built a data system where you had to say what a taco was, basically. And not to get super into it, but basically like that system had scaling limitations. And so we then developed like, we probably blew away like 20% of that system, which mostly was good, but like had some issues. And then we reorganized how we did it so we could operationally scale it. And a lot of this stuff is like, we talked to so many people who had done catalogs with like, for instance, like McMaster is about 700,000 things. So we have literally like, almost 2 orders of magnitude more things. And so, like over an order of magnitude, I should say. And so it's just a totally different problem. And, they spend like, what looks like to be $50 to $100 million a year on people doing the organization and maintenance of these vendor contracts and their data. So like they have a lot of money, right? Like I think they're doing like billions a year in top line at very high margins. And so they can afford to do it. We can't afford to do that. So we had to get very, clever in hacking together this thing that would actually do, like McMaster quality data at scale, and we think we're basically almost there as far as like we need to scale it out and do a lot of polishing for sure. But we feel good about it.
Awesome. Okay. I wanted to show you the light at the end of the tunnel. So now let's talk about your favorite part of what you do at Volition.
So the favorite part of what I do at Volition, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like twofold. Like one, I mean, it's funny. Like I literally grew up, my dad was a purchasing guy for manufacturing. And so I literally grew up with these catalogs and was obsessed with doing it. So I actually love just
They're very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, like, and we have a back-end interface that's like literally like it's keyboard interface, it's like very fast. So you can just like kind of jack into the matrix. That's very satisfying, I love, actually another great part is going to our customers. Like our customers are so cool. It's like, oh, they're building like rockets and robots and, it's like, okay, cool. We get to be the people that unblock all these cool things. I love that too. Whenever I bring on someone from like sales or something, I'm like, you guys are the first ones who go out to these companies and get to actually, kind of deploy the future in a sense and help others deploy the future. Like, I think that's awesome. But yeah, I think the data problems are really fun just for my own kind of like nerdery. And then I love the customers. And I think that I think this industry, especially mechanical, it doesn't know the future that much. Like I've been to a lot of the conferences of people who do industrial distribution. And I think a lot of people kind of got kicked in the teeth, like during outsourcing and stuff. And they feel like, like it's never going to come back and, this kind of stuff. And I think they've kind of lost the kind of passion, like a lot of people are like, yeah, I gotta sell some bolts, and I really think the industry needs big reform, and I want to be the agent of reform, like at Volition, basically I want us to be this, this marketplace that can help everyone get better. Like a lot of the suppliers ask us like, hey, we know we're not good at this stuff. We don't know what to do, and on the buy side, engineers and sourcing people tell us the same stuff where it's like, we wish that this existed, but can you make it? I think that's the biggest pushback we have from the buy side people is like, we don't think you can do this. And they were true. They were correct for probably like, a year and a half or more, after is like, we could not do it. And, I think that like, we are going to prove this year that we did it.
Nice. Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, I know, I'm very excited.
So speaking of suppliers, you've mentioned a couple times how it was hard at the start to bring them on, but now that you've got a public face, the people can actually look at, like they all want to buy you and stuff. I'm curious about what it's like bringing suppliers on, and also, do you have to say no to people? Are you trying to like choose specific ones so that you don't have a ton of redundancy, or is that all good for you?
Yeah, I know, it's a really good question. I mean, we do a lot of stuff where we, first talk to what the people who are buying things want, right? So what vendors do they like? What categories do they need? All that kind of stuff. And so we build like a prioritization list based on that. And then we don't even approach companies that we don't want. And some come inbound. And then, we basically have to kind of, swipe left and right of whether we want them on right now, because we only have so much resources of onboarding, data and organizing all the different data that comes in, right? So there's definitely prioritization that goes on. If they don't meet a level of like kind of seriousness as a business, like we do like evaluations to see like, do they ship on time? Do they have a bad credit rating? Do they treat their employees poorly? Any of these things are like, oh, okay, like this might not be someone we want on here. But our big list of suppliers is basically people our customers said they liked working with. So that to me is like, they did way more research than we would be able to do on any given vendor, right? Because a lot of them have a whole approved vendor process. So a lot of this is just, hey, tell us who you want on the site, and then we put them on the site.
Cool.
Yeah.
And they probably already have the contacts and stuff. So
all the what? Sorry.
All the contacts and stuff.
All the context or contacts?
Oh, contacts.
Yeah, that's actually really nice when they're just like, hey, like meet Nick, or at this time Natalie or Mark, and just get these guys the data into your system. That is definitely helpful.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, totally.
We got there in the end.
and if you go to a big customer on the buy side, and then they go to their supplier, the supplier's like, we got to do that to keep these people happy. That's what we're hoping for.
Cool. So after talking about the vendors, let's talk a little bit about the customers. So some of these are they're sold in very large lots, or a lot of the servo motors are like $1,000 and stuff. This
Yeah.
seems to be definitely more of like an industrial supply marketplace than
So
perhaps a hobbyist one. Who are your target customers?
yeah, like I would say the most close in on the bullseye, because we do have hobbyist people who do reach out to us, but it's not
Uh-huh.
what we actively market to. Like I would say the center of ours, it's really like people who make short runs of very sophisticated machinery. So it could be like machine tools or robots or automation integrators, like people who put the
Mhm.
robots together to make a line. It could be manufacturing folks who are setting up a given process. It could be laboratory equipment. It could be aerospace fixtures or all these different things. But yeah, it's definitely people who have a lot of money. We are a startup.
Mm.
We definitely look at that. But I would also say that like we draw on a lot of those hobbyist suppliers as well, actually. So like the people in industry, a lot of people like are just figuring out that like, Spark Fun exists,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's like, yeah, you don't want to use a $3,000 servo when like a $30 stepper will do, and Arduinos and Raspberry Pis are great. And for a lot of things like test fixtures or whatever, like you don't need some giant thing. And SparkFun is way easier to use for a lot of people who are like, say, mechanical folks who are not really programmers first, and so I think that like I really like working with companies like SparkFun because they bring like the ease of use of the sort of hobbyist stuff, but now they've moved more professional as well. And yeah, you can see it's saying about like prototyping for the Internet of Things. Like, I think that like they've learned that probably even before we did, that like this stuff is useful for beyond the hobby market while still supporting the hobby market.
Yeah, it all kind of overlaps. There's, like we keep talking about with taxonomy, there's no rigid division between hobbyist and an industrial customer. A lot of the
Oh,
people
totally.
working at industrial companies may be like building really intense hobbyist projects on the side. Like this,
Yeah.
I just think of this guy, I think it's Matt Denton. He has like a massive like walking robot that he rides around inside of. And like, where does
Yeah,
that
and I've
fall?
seen
Like, that's some serious motors in there.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when does a hobby or a nonprofit project basically just turn into
Mm.
like very sophisticated stuff? Like for sure. Yeah, I think about things like the Long Now or something like that.
Oh,
As
yeah.
far as like just crazy stuff, but for a basically, I mean, something close to art or philosophy or something like this as a project.
Let's talk about the Long Now Foundation for just a second. So,
Okay.
what do you know about them? And I know that they've got this like orrery project slash what is it, 10,000 year clock? Is that what you're referring
Yeah,
to?
well, the
Is it?
orrery is in, I think at least the prototype of it is in the Long Now Bar in San Francisco,
Yeah.
in Fort Mason. Great bar if the interval, if people haven't checked it out. Really great thing. Yeah, they basically like, I mean, I was actually just at a Long Now event, actually, funny enough. And so this was with, if you guys know who Jenny Odell is, she just came out with her newest book, Saving Time. Long Now
Oh.
is yeah, very much a yeah, trying to encourage long-term thinking. And the 10,000 year clock actually is yeah, it's like bored into a mountain, and I think it's Texas or something like this. And it's meant to wind itself, I think, based on the heating and cooling during the day. It somehow has a thing that can do that, and that's how it's kept wound. And it's supposed to be like this, yeah, kind of like art installation that's meant to make you think about long-term things on the 10,000 year scale. And whenever they have dates in the Long Now, they'll say like 0 2023 or something like
Hmm.
this to signify the 10,000.
So cool.
But yeah, and then Xander, who's the head of it, is a BattleBots guy. Actually, I forget
Oh,
what team
no way.
he's on, but yeah, he's a big BattleBots guy. And I think one of the machine shops, at least one, that does parts of the clock, also builds the BattleBots. So it's it's still very Bay Area. A lot of people doing like insane Burning Man projects. I mean, in many ways, like the Long Now clock is just like the world's biggest Burning Man installation or something.
Yeah. Uh, a lot of overlap with Autodesk and Pier 9 back in the day as well.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. There must be a lot of people in common between them, I'm sure.
I'm writing down Jenny Odell recently, or just now, because it sounds like that was very interesting.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, no, I know. Jenny's great. Jenny's a friend of mine, and so that's why I was there actually, was to check out her book launch. And I think that like she does a lot of like, I don't know, this is like the philosophy of time, and thinking of it not just in clock time, but various
Mm.
perspectives of time, and tying that into sort of like natural rhythms of all different kinds. Yeah, it's definitely worth a read. I just finished it actually.
I'll check that out. Okay, so I've got a bit of a random question for you, but
Yeah,
as
yeah.
someone who like spends so much time organizing these things in a website online, what is is your personal storage space just really incredible? If like I went to your workshop, do you have the most meticulously organized bins and like everything in little labels and stuff, or are you a person who like just leaves stuff all over the place and like active work surfaces everywhere? Because yeah,
It's funny. It's funny. So when I had a shop, this is the sad story. What is that thing where they said like the cobbler has bad shoes or something like this?
yeah.
Like I used to have a workshop where I used to work on cars and build projects and stuff, and it was definitely more of the organized chaos vibe. Definitely not like the website, which is actually like more anal. But yeah, that's how I would work. But yeah, the last time I really had a serious workshop was in Pittsburgh. In San Francisco, I just found it like almost impossible to do it, and that's why we met at Tech Shop, because I was building a project at the time, and I was like, well, Tech Shop is going to do it, and then they
Mm.
sort of enforced good shop practice there, which was helpful. But yeah, I wish that I had a shop. That's actually like sort of we're a totally remote company right now, but like if we were to do anything, I kind of want to like make a tech shop again, but for a community or something like that. That's kind of like a dream.
Yeah. Speaking of Pittsburgh, and also tech shop later on, tell us about your personal history. So you've got this history, not before Volition, you were already a person who was in, for example, the Pittsburgh hackerspace. Tell us about your
Yeah.
experiences there.
Well, it's funny. So I mean, I got into the whole yeah, I guess before there was a maker scene, there was a hacker scene, like the open source crowd and all that kind of stuff. And I
Mm.
grew up in rural Pennsylvania, like Western Pennsylvania, out like sort of outside Youngstown, Ohio. And so no one I knew ever knew about any of that shit. So like I knew how to do hardware because I used to like work on cars and weld, and then I learned programming to reprogram engine computers. So that it wasn't a web thing or even anything like that. And then I moved to Pittsburgh, and someone gave me Neil Gershenfeld's Fab book. And I was like, whoa,
Mm.
you can combine computers and manufacturing. Like I just like didn't know enough. I was like almost more like trad vintage. I used to buy micrometers at yard sales and stuff. It's like kind of ridiculous. But yeah, when I got to Pittsburgh, I was like, okay, like this maker thing's happening. There's not a maker space. I drove around to like all these different ones. Like, I visited like, MIC Resistor and HackDC and
Oh
Pumping Station
yeah.
1 in Chicago and a bunch of different ones. Yeah, I know. The Neil Gershenfeld book is great. I mean, I'm sure probably a lot of people know about this stuff now because it was written
I
like, yeah,
hadn't heard of
2007.
this, so I'm gonna go check that out.
This is
But
one of
yeah.
the books that like they started like this parallel thing to the maker movement, like the Fab Labs, right?
Uh-huh.
And Fab Labs
Oh, of
started as like
course.
a government, like basically like they did all this research that was like serious academic research, but then because it was from the government, they were like, you need to do some community outreach thing. So like, oh, we'll make a little lab and like have people come in. And so they made the Fab Lab thing, and I think they're still doing it, but it's more
Oh
like
yeah.
educational institutions, I would say, have Fab Labs. And then I would say that like, Del Doherty and Saul Griffith and all those kind of people, made Make Magazine. And then that started off this other thing, that kind of was in parallel to the Fab Labs. And definitely they have a lot of things in common and share a lot of things. Like they're both using Arduinos and, all the different 3D printing stuff coming out. But yeah, so I went and went in Pittsburgh. And so me and Matt Stoltz, who was like a better maker than me, we ended up, kind of being okay, let's start one of these things. And then we found this great artist. His name was Dale McNutt. He was basically retired and had a building with space in it. And in Pittsburgh, you can get a space. I think we paid $300 a month for 2,000 square
Oh wow.
feet. And so for the few members, you could just cover it all, and so we were able to do this thing, and it's still going. So that was really my first experience with like kind of building a community, around this stuff. And then that's really where I was like, well, you know what? People were donating all this equipment to us and all this other stuff. And I was like, I still want to access like more pro equipment now that I understood this existed. And so I
Mm-hmm.
made a marketplace called CloudFab, which then later was bought by a couple
Oh
different
yes.
companies, including Pinocchio, which people on here
Mhm.
might recognize. They were the ones who bought the 3D printing side of the business, where we had made like an API for 3D printing that could get you all the different pro 3D printing processes like SLA, SLS, PolyJet, stuff like that. We had sold to them. And then as part of, I know I love Pinocchio. They're great. They started off laser cutting, and they're like, what if we added 3D printing? And now they keep adding more stuff, which is pretty cool. And so then it was at Hack Pittsburgh that I started running these events, and ran not just hardware events but software events. And that's when I moved to San Francisco after that, that's what led to the hardware startup meetup, which was like, okay,
Yes.
the maker thing happened. I started working at Tech Shop where we met. in San Francisco. And I was like, hey, like, I was a startup guy and a maker guy. And I was like, with their powers combined, can this be a thing? And, Tech Shop was nice enough to let me send an email out to their list. And I think our first one had 60 people showed up to Tech Shop for it. And
Nice.
soon that just really took off. And, I think we have 8,000, 10,000, 9,000. 9,000 members in the San Francisco one. And then I made a Reddit for hardware startups. So there's a hardware startup Reddit. And then I just started sending people being like, hey, do you want to make one of these in your city? And I had a little playbook I would send. So I think at the peak, we had 30 or 50 of them or something like that. There was a map actually, that I'm not sure I still have, but I think what happened was the hardware scene, the first hardware startup scene, I mean, you could say even before I was involved in it, it was MakerBot and a few of those people in 2008 or 9 or 10, something around there. And then there was a big kind of crash of that. It went out of favor. The maker movement sort of rose from the ashes of that as more hobbyists who weren't trying to make money with it. And then I think that there was another thing that, I got into the early part of where more VCs started backing it, but it was consumer. We're talking about Pebble Watch, was famous for having this huge Kickstarter, hardware Kickstarters happened. It's pretty cool. So I felt very privileged to be able to actually kind of just get lucky, honestly, and just make the event as the thing was just getting started. And I could just kind of, end up knowing a lot of people in there.
Wow,
funny, Flex is there. Nice. They're everywhere.
And I was there.
Yeah, there you are.
That's what it Bolt back in the day. These
That's
are
so funny.
great times, and they're still happening. I didn't realize that there was just one on March 2nd. I got to get back on the horse here.
And there's been different, and so I don't even run it anymore. I basically pay for the page and then make sure people who are doing it are good people. And so they're still doing them. And I think after me, it was Guy Cavalcante of Megabots and Artisans Asylum in Somerville outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Yeah,
and
Boston
then
Dynamics too, right?
Say what?
Never mind.
Oh yeah, that's right. RoboGee. And then after that, it went to a few different people. And so it's pretty cool. It's great that that it keeps going. It's funny because as soon as this thing comes out, then there's another thing happening now, which I feel doesn't have an event yet, but is sort of an emerging scene that, we have a Signal or some kind of group like this right now. And it's basically the founders of manufacturing tech companies, which I think now it went way enterprise. So previously it was Fitbit and Pebble, and now it's more engineering tools, a Flux or something, right, would be part of this trend. And the VCs for so long would never fund this stuff. And, some of this stuff a Flux or whatever is pretty complex software, and definitely Plethora, my last company, even more so, almost self-driving car level of software. And that shit ain't cheap. And so you got to have VCs or the government or someone do that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that community evolves. I'm happy to talk more about that, but that's sort of where it is now. At least that's what I'm kind of involved with as a community.
Oh, please. I would love to hear more about that because it's something that I don't have a ton of visibility into. I definitely have watched the maker movement have its kind of heyday, and then sort of a lot of large corporations were like, oh, this thing is happening. Let's dump a bunch of money in and we'll get these people because clearly they all want to be hardware company founders and stuff, but then they realized that wasn't necessarily the case, and that a lot of people want to upcycle stuff and use stuff they already have on hand. And
that was the funniest thing, right? I remember there was one year, I feel this was when I knew that hardware was sort of or the maker movement had sort of jumped the shark, or at least the formal part of it that had the shows was Maker Faire. Was it 2016 or 17 or something like that? And it was sponsored by Oracle or something. And they have this giant booth, and it's oh my God, Oracle, Jesus. That's what's happening.
And I think they realized that wasn't going to really cut it because, and then all of a sudden you had Intel pulling out, dropping all their maker boards, and these other ones, and also this focus on instantaneous returns that they wanted. What?
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think even Autodesk that had, Carl is a real maker himself with his own shop who builds stuff. Carl Bass is legit. I feel that he committed to this, and they have way more authenticity than pretty much anyone else from it as a giant company. And even Pier 9 really kind of didn't really work out for them, I think. It worked out for a lot of other people, but I think from their perspective, it didn't. So
yeah, I think they've pivoted it to a couple of times to more sort of industrial manufacturing focused stuff. They brought back the residency a couple of times, but in a more sort of like, yeah, very much more sort of factory oriented or manufacturing
Yes.
oriented.
And I think that so what ended up happening is I think that there's, and I think this is going to be true of like a lot of VC stuff because, VCs, they're, I mean, honestly, like without being too cynical, which I'm definitely very cynical, having raised a bunch of money from VCs over my whole career. But like, I would say that they don't know a lot about actually what this stuff is. And like maybe the most engineering people there are software engineers. And so they don't know these problems very well, and I think, hey, invest in what you know. Like I wouldn't invest in social networks or whatever, because I don't know the hell anything about social networks, but they do. But I think things like Pebble were like, oh yeah, I could see myself owning Pebble. And a lot of these other things were compelling from a consumer perspective, but the business models didn't work, basically. And so I think then they got a bad reputation, and VC, very trendy. And I think the issue is without VC, a lot of this hard tech stuff doesn't work. Like you can't do it. And the government, this is one of my hobby horses, is the NSF and NIH and all these people that do like big government funding of stuff like industrial policy, or at least industrial funding of these things, they don't focus on tools at all. So there's very little going on in like CAD research at an academic level. And then people like Autodesk, like Carl got the whole fusion thing going and everything else, which is great. But his predecessor, I believe, made a lot of cuts on that and, basically focused on making an Adobe style subscription business model, not fundamental hardware innovation, because they can't justify it, fundamental software innovation. And so what I think is going on though, is that now SpaceX and Tesla and, now Endural, these are like kind of the golden children of the hardware movement that are all, basically like all of Elon and people's stuff. But the VCs now see that and they're like, oh, okay, like it makes money. We like money. Let's see if hardware stuff can work in an enterprise. And so a lot of the companies that are started in the space, I mean, it's got to be like a third of them are alumni from one of those companies, that now VCs are like, oh, you have Tesla on your resume, you must be good, and they need that to get them over the mental hurdle of it's a scary space I don't understand, right? So those are happening more. And I think the supply chain stuff even more, they were like, oh, wow, like things come from factories, not Target or, or whatever high-end place they're shopping at. And so I think people started being like, oh yeah, manufacturing. At the same time, all the other things they used to invest in are getting way expensive, right? This huge bubbly thing where like, if you invest in it, it's way overpriced. And so they're trying to figure out what's next. And I think it's like, hey, like these are laggard industries because they're really hard and they're kind of grumpy old men that aren't willing to change a lot of the time. And, people like Volition, like we have to work with those old guys who know everything, right? Like that's the issue, is like, they don't want to change, but they also know everything. So you got to work with them to make the thing go into the future. And I think every company, I'm sure Flex finds the same thing, though maybe people doing board design and stuff are a little bit more progressive, but you find that sales is actually like, you got to be very good at sales. And even if you make the thing, they don't buy it. And like, there's a lot of great tech sitting on a shelf that doesn't sell that much because no one could convince anyone to buy it, or they couldn't get the product just right from a user and business model point of view for someone to afford it. Like someone like say Rethink Robotics or something, they had good hardware and everything, but I feel like that they couldn't convince customers to buy it at any price because, I don't know, I have opinions, but basically like, I think that cost wasn't the issue. And I think that they had gone too much down that road of cutting costs when they should have been like reworking them, But yeah, that's what this manufacturing tech thing. And there's a little group of a few hundred companies, maybe at most, maybe like 30 to 50 of them are like well-funded. And it's pretty exciting. Like I would say like people are starting to actually find this as a real movement going forward. And even like the government and funding people are now paying attention to be like, okay, like this makes sense, but it's very nascent, very nascent.
I love that. Okay. You said the word future a lot in there. There's a slide share that you shared with me, and I haven't really had a chance to dig through it a lot, but also a lot of it, I think maybe it would be communicated more with like, someone talking over it. But yeah, I would love to hear about, so that your description on here is very shiny. My latest thinking on a long-term vision for the future of hardware engineering and manufacturing. Title comes from the idea that a machine can design and make anything you wish for is approaching the creation capabilities of a god. And then emergent technologies You gotta put some really flashy language on there to get people's attention. I love it.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about this. Yeah.
So it's funny. This talk actually originated at a private AI conference I was invited to.
Ah.
And I was like the hardware guy and actually the manufacturing guy. There were other chip people there, but it was only like, I don't know, 30 or 40 people. And so I was invited by, a good friend of mine who's very into the semiconductor world and AI world. And so I gave this talk and he said like, go crazy with it. Like, go, what's the insane future? Like AI people, they're used to, AGIs taking over everything. They're a hard crowd to please. So go over the top. So I thought, okay, let's go fully into sacrilege. To make the point,
So AGI, artificial general intelligence, just to put that out there.
Yeah, let's just say we're basically, I mean, depending on what your philosophy is, I kind of feel like in many ways, like all this technology is us actually trying to become gods. And if you look at like the Greek gods, or a lot of other civilizations, they were just like, we want humans, but superhumans, like that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think that like the point of this talk, and I love everyone's feedback on it. If you have it, building the God machine, is essentially like, okay, so here's where we are. And like, yeah, like I really try to like, yeah, be a little bit tongue in cheek with some of these titles and everything, but explain kind of where we are. And like that slide right there, the replicator, or sorry, the previous one.
We got it. 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. The previous one.
Oh.
Yeah, the one with the ecology. Maybe it was slide 10.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah, I think that was the next one. Here we go.
Okay. Like basically saying like, I mean, this is my big thing. The reason I said fake news replicators and the previous one is like, there's probably a lot of physics reasons, at least in the like next 10 or 20 years, why you're not just going to be like, pseudo make me like, like a sandwich or whatever, right? Is it really not letting you do it?
Oh, just give me a sec. I'll fix it.
Yeah, no worries. But the idea being that like, if you're 3D printing, say metal next to plastic, well, it's going to melt the plastic. And if you're printing like the metal first, well, are you always going to be able to print it first and not melt the plastic later? Like, there's like physics reasons and like just deposition rates where like a 3D printer, even going really fast, you start to get these weird problems where it's like, okay, if you injection mold a part, this big, it's like a few seconds. To make it, right? So you get like, if you're doing a big O notation on this, it's kind of like X squared or something like this, where X is volume, where on say an FDM printer, it's almost like just X. It's just like, it's depositing linear. And there's a little bit of relayer time or whatever. But if you had an FDM printer go as fast as a injection molding press, I mean, literally, I think it has to move at the speed of light. Like, I think someone did the calculations for like if it actually did that, then you can say, okay, well, what if we did the thing that say Carbon Robotics did, which was like the clip technology, continual 2D layers or whatever. Well, then you run into all these weird material property issues where you can't actually print in this thing. So I basically think that like 3D printing is not going to like sort of be the God machine. The God machine is like actually this giant ecosystem of things. It's actually like a machine the size of like the Earth or something, or maybe like a city or something like this at the very least, but probably like the Earth. And it's really this ecosystem. So this slide is just steel. So it's showing how like, iron ore and scrap turns into all these different end uses through the process. And it's like literally this, it's probably like 100,000 of these that is like all the industries. Like speaking of taxonomies, there's some fun taxonomies you can see here. Like one of them is the harmonized trade codes. There's a fun website I love called Import Yeti. If you go on Import Yeti, you can look up your favorite kind of like either consumer suppliers or any supplier and look for all the things that they're shipping from anywhere. So like, you're like, oh, I want to know where, like X company is getting like, yeah, type in someone, you can find a company. Yeah, I don't even know if they do this, but yeah, there we go. And then you can click on SparkFun on like the blue link, and then you can start seeing what they're buying on there. So this is their shipments, but look down.
No way.
So there's these import-export companies. You can look on the left or the right and look at what actually the things are. So you can see like, air compressor with, those HS codes, that's harmonized shipping or something like that, or harmonized system codes. Right there. And so if you look at like 8414.90, there's a code that, I mean, these are, there's not a code for every product, right? That's actually what we're doing is we literally know the SKU numbers and part numbers for everything is the goal. But yeah, manufactured articles of, whatever. And so you can see like, okay, here's roughly where it is. So if there was only one centrifugal fan on their website, for instance, you would know it came from there, just as an example. And so, this is the kind of stuff.
What is smartphone getting up to with this? Nuclear reactors, boilers, machinery.
Yeah, I mean, another issue is the harmonized tariff code was made before like the modern world in many ways. So
Right.
it does some funny stuff like, it'll have like the most fine grained things for like agricultural products. It'll be like, Valencia oranges with pits, or, so we stuff like very specific. And then it'll be like computer parts, like not even saying anything specific sometimes, So, but, it is interesting to see this. So yada, yada, manufacturing is an ecology, and we have to treat it like one if we're going to bring it into the future. And so to do so, that means that like you need an entire community of people making manufacturing tech, both hardware and software, to do that. And so that's why I'm excited about this kind of community that, our company is one part of, which is that these communities are needed to kind of make and deploy these systems to manufacturers who, a lot of times aren't able to do this. Like, even if they are very sophisticated, manufacturers, especially in the United States, have low net profit margins. So they can't actually invest in making new CAD systems or something. Like typically the government, the military, maybe it's industry consortia a long time ago. They don't even do that anymore, but sometimes they do that, can do this. It's not individual manufacturers that can do things like make better CAD or different machine tools, or, it's conservative industries, And so that's what I think the God Machine actually is. So the talk gets into like, well, how would you do that? And so it's like, okay, so it's an ecology, we have this community, but then there are so many things. And so this was an AI conference. So I went into sort of like some AI stuff of like, how would you even, like God machine architecture, like basically looking for like, how does design work? How do you simulate? How do you do production? And, obviously this is extremely simplified, but each one of these steps is sort of like a section on this talk, right? About like where these things land.
Love this. And can we share this link with our community here? Cool. We'll put it in the description along with all the other links most of the other links. Some of them you can just go find for yourself. Like,
yeah, cool.
Yeah. We are close to time, but I wonder if you have time for a couple more questions.
Of course. Yeah, totally. Let's do it.
Yes. Okay, cool. Because for example, so there's the future, which we were already on. I have a question for you that's a little bit more about the community side of things. And, being, you talk about this God machine as being sort of an ecosystem that encompasses, the whole planet, maybe space in the future. That was another question. But
intelligent life.
Yeah, but it's very much humans in the loop kind of process. You mentioned before when you're talking about looking at distributors, how do they treat their employees? And also having been someone who ran communities like Hack Pittsburgh and hardware startup meetups, tell me about how maybe your philosophy on that and how you approach it, because it clearly isn't just like when you're running communities, it also informs your approach in terms of onboarding suppliers and stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And actually one of the values we have at Volition is actually solidarity, which is about like, inside the team, amongst the teams with our vendors, and then the community at large, right? Like we want everyone to be like allies, and we want to think about all of them. And so I think you have to approach community stuff the same way. Like I think that a lot of people, they get into trouble when they're like, oh, like for instance, if I were to make the hardware meetup, and I would call it like Volition's hardware meetup, that's lame. Like you're not serving the community. Like you need to serve the community first and actually provide real value for people. And then like, you'll just be known as like those nice people who help the community, and then hopefully you made a product that is useful to that community. Like that's at least the business case. But for me, it goes beyond business. Like in many ways, like my foundation is community and like, what is the impact we want in the world? And then I do startups as like one tool to do that. But like, I also do politics, I'm pretty involved in like the YIMBY housing movement or whatever with
Nice.
YIMBY Action. Yeah, I'm on the board of YIMBY Action.
Just in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, I help them a lot too. And so both of those are things that, you can see there. Yeah, YIMBY politics. It's sort of like, how do we make abundance for people, and most people's biggest cost is housing, especially in the Bay Area, but usually everyone. And it's artificially so. So I'm all about trying to reduce that. And, speaking of community, there's a lot of community there too, right? And you have to start with the community. You can't, yeah, you can't start from personal interest. That's the issue. And so much of politics is personal interest, right? And to a certain extent, that's fine. Everyone votes their own personal interest in a sense. But I really do think about it as like, what is the base of what we want to achieve here while we're alive and for humanity, for them to fulfill their dreams? And then what do we do to build it? And I try to make companies that don't have a tension between like, business outcomes and human community outcomes. And so I think that like, if Volition goes really well, I don't think anyone's going to be hurt. And like, even the suppliers, like, I don't want to turn into like Amazon where you beat the shit out of all the suppliers. Like, no, like, unlike Amazon, there aren't 100 red sweater companies that are all commodity. It's like, there's a lot of like these, long tail of hardware people. We need those people. We need them to keep designing things, and the world's going to keep getting better. We just need to give them the tools to design better things, the feedback to know what customers want, the ability to sell better and have operations better, all that stuff. And so I think it really, that feeds into like everything for me. Like that's the first thing for me.
It very much does seem to dovetail with the stuff around AI and automation, or efficiency in manufacturing. These very much have the potential to, for example, decrease the amount that people have to work, and that was kind of the dream. That's always kind of been the dream. But on the other hand, there's this situation where they just end up being used to create more value without that value meaning
100%.
that people get to work less. And
yeah, I know, and it's funny because I read a lot of like kind of Marxist theory, and like I would say I'm somewhat Marxian. Although I don't know, it's probably too long for this conversation to talk about that. But yeah, like I think that we are in an era of essentially like oligarchic control, and so yeah, like these technologies that could be liberatory, we aren't doing. My issue with the current Marxist kind of orthodoxy is they kind of believe in a zero-sum pie and we have to divide it. And in power, that is true, and we do have to take power from the oligarchy. But I would say that like I think that that we need an abundance agenda. I really love actually. There's an author called Lee Phillips. He wrote a book, The People's Republic of Walmart, I think, which is basically talking about like, how would we have an abundance? And, he's framing this in a very socialist command economy perspective against what was called the socialist calculation problem, which, basically central planning doesn't work. And I think it probably still wouldn't work, but like, anyway, he has a whole thing on that. And then he has another one that I can never get this book title right, but it's called like, what is it? Austerity something and the collapse porn addicts. And he's basically like railing against the left's, current anti-abundance agenda. Like they're really against technology and stuff. And it's like, no, like, I mean, this is again on my Twitter profile, it says left accelerationist. That's what I see this as. It's like, I actually want to accelerate the thing in technology, but I want to use it for human ends. The orthodox people would say that's impossible, but I don't think they're right. I think that like they're using too much theory. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all that unless you really want. But yeah, it very much, I agree with you. Like it could be liberatory. It isn't now. I think things are coming to a head though, because people realize that like, wow, there's a lot of really rich people and a lot of really poor people. And like those poor people can totally do stuff. Why aren't we letting them do stuff and investing in them, even though we have the money? Like, seems strange, like in this amazing world that we still have like people who are homeless and stuff. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's coming back to the sort of tools and how we use them. Like, do we use them to
Totally.
enable people who can't currently build stuff, or are those tools only accessible to people who already have a lot of resources, and are
Yes.
you just going to accentuate that divide?
And
Yeah,
that's what I
very.
love about the manufacturing software market and whatever, right? It's like, okay, if Marx is trying to seize the means of productions, we're trying to dissolve the means of production, make it so like anyone can have CAD, just go on to, Fusion or whatever, pay, not that much per month to do it, or have a factory in the cloud, like a Pinoco or a Xometry or Fictive or something, have all the components at your fingertips with, a Volition or something like that. Like that's abundance in this world, right? And then we can start making hardware, and then we can start being like, why are we paying like $2 million for MRIs or, whatever? You can start building these things that are just like, yeah, if you don't have to maintain giant infrastructures because someone else is doing it, that's a way of seizing the means of production in another way.
And really a way of improving access to all kinds of stuff, like you were talking about why are MRIs so expensive, the future of open source, just so much potential for people to be able to create their own solutions to these problems that are more accessible. So we are so far over time, but that's fine. I have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. What are you looking for from people for the next stage of Volition? Are you looking for people to try out the beta?
It's funny. The main thing I do right now is I'm now recruiting. So I think the main thing I'm looking for is like software engineers who do full stack, web design. That is the main thing I'm looking for right now. But if other people have stuff they want to join about and think they might be there, we have jobs on our website on the Join Us page. But yeah, like that's the main thing. And then yeah, the community will know when the beta is actually like usable. I'll make it loud. And if you want, I'll come back and talk about it for sure.
Explore the world of parts. Click on Join Us. Go check out this page. And
yeah, the bottom of that page has the it sort of talks about how the company works. Ooh. And then yeah, here's the open positions. That top one, spent a lot of time on well, really both of these. I went from a fundraiser to recruiter in a month.
You wear so many hats as a founder and CEO, but you're probably used to it by now, huh?
I mean, I think that otherwise I would be bored. Like if I just did recruiting, I would be like, I agree with Boris. The industry is right for us.
Yes. Open source towards lowering the entrance barrier.
Totally,
love it.
Totally. Yeah. 100% agree.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Oh, did I cut you off?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. And yeah, keep going. I love what you're doing, Alex. So keep doing it.
Cheers. Rock on, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Rock on. We'll end this somehow. We got to bring it home. Okay, thank you, Nick. This has been a pleasure, and I hope to see you around sometime. It's cool that we're both still in the day. And everyone, we'll see you next week, and hack on.
All right.